a lot of the times customers and people who are running business, they want that immediate gratification. And when we're charged to do that, oftentimes the right thing is to say, no, 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 we can't. And if that means that, well, this isn't, a good fit for us, then I would rather do that than to jump in and do a poor job.
Technology is transforming how we think, how we lead, and how we win. From InterVision, this is Status Go, the show helping IT leaders move beyond the status quo, master their craft, and propel their IT vision.
I hate to state the obvious. Proper cybersecurity is no longer just a check the box activity. Cyber is once again getting the attention of corporate boards, CEOs, and business owners. If a CIO, VP, or director of IT is asked to speak to company leadership, chances are it's about cybersecurity, the threat of attack, and the question, are we protected? For years now, larger companies have responded to the cyber threats by adding a new leader to the C-suite, a CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, someone trained and experienced in protecting the organization from cyber threats, preparing them to respond quickly when attacked, and guiding the company in the right balance of investment and protection. But what about the small and mid-sized businesses? Those who need a strong cybersecurity program but can't justify the expense of a full-time CISO. Today on Status Go, we will dive into fractional CISO services, otherwise known as virtual or vCISO services. What are they and what they aren't? And how you can best leverage these types of services. Our guest is Alan Jenkins. Alan is InterVision's very own Vice President of Cybersecurity Consulting and someone who has spent several years driving change in this space. Welcome to Status Go, Alan.
Well, hey, Jeff, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm really looking forward to this conversation and unpacking this concept of vCISO services. But before we get to that, I'd love to hear a little bit about your background, how you got to where you are today, and then we'll dive into the vCISO services.
Sure, sure. So I can go down the long and winding road, so to
That's
speak.
right.
Yeah, so it is a really, really important topic, and I don't just say that because it's the world that I live in, but it just is. I think one of the indicators of that is, last night on 60 Minutes, the top story was all about cyber, really, and how all of these things. We live in such a connected world now that everything is precariously balanced. So backing into that world is really how I got there, though. So I've been a technologist most of my adult life. So I grew up as an engineer, helping people to design and build computer networks, and moved into different roles throughout the 20, 30 plus years. I won't really age myself there, but over the time, backed into a number of interesting scenarios with folks. And probably the thing that drew me into cyber was we had a customer that was a healthcare customer who reached out and asked for some help in their leadership. And actually, they needed somebody to take on a director of technology role for them because their director was leaving. I stepped into the role in a fractional sort of spot for them to fill the gap, kind of keep the trains running on time, and help them recruit for a new IT director. And while that was happening, I found out that, hey, we also need you to act as our chief information security officer. We've had some issues with some data breaches, and this is healthcare. This is a moderately good sized organization. And so I backed into that. I fell into that and learned a lot working through the investigation on that data breach and working with the team to better secure that environment. And through most of the things in my life, I've kind of fallen into it and scraped my knees and scraped my elbows and learned a lot. And I was able to come out of that and said, hey, there's a lot more need for this out there in the world. Let's see how we can help others do that.
Nothing like kind of going from the frying pan to the fire, right? You take on this assignment and find out they're in the midst of a breach. What was that? What was that like walking into that, just
Well,
emotionally?
Well, it's stressful. It's highly stressful. One, I've been doing technology for a long time, but most of that was focused on, and I hate to say it like this, but it was a stick and move. You help somebody build something, you build it well, and you move to the next.
Hmm.
Not usually operationally minded, and certainly not that concerned about security,
Hmm.
as most of us hadn't been for up until probably
Right.
the last 10 years, right? If we
Yeah.
built a network and it worked and it did the things that we wanted, the applications ran, the phones, gave you dial tone, you were good. And not that cyber hasn't been around for a while, but it really has hit mainstream in the last
Yeah.
10 or 15 years. And so that turning the corner and saying just making it work isn't enough, making sure that it's secure, and then what do we do if the security controls that we put in place fail?
Yeah.
And that's where it gets hairy. And certainly I've seen a lot of that. But the short answer was it was really scary.
Yeah.
You jumped into something that you're not quite sure you know what to do with, but people are counting on you to help them. And
Yeah.
you know, sink or swim. I
Hmm.
was very fortunate that I floated to the top and was able to stay there. And the secret to a lot of success for me is also that I've been surrounded by really, really good people.
Hmm.
And being able to find those good people and learn from them and leverage their strengths is always important.
Isn't that a testament to life in IT, where you're surrounded by great people and you get to learn from those around you? What a great experience that had to be, and it seems like it propelled you in this new direction of what became virtual CISO services. I don't know that we were calling them that 7 or 8 years ago. But talk to us a little bit, Alan, about what is the role. Let's just talk in general, the role of the CISO. What
Sure.
does that person bring to the table?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, honestly, because and all things, specifically security, get very confusing for people, right? So there's so many different roles. It's gotten very large. The things that are sexy and that a lot of people are interested in, and a lot of programs are built around hacking
Hmm.
or those sorts of things. But really, the CISO role, Chief Information Security Officer, to me is the person who needs to kind of chart the course and help drive the program forward and work with the business to understand what's critical to the business, what would hurt if it weren't available or if it were
Hmm.
compromised, and then determine, well, how can we protect those things, and then if things go awry, how can we rapidly detect and contain. So really, if you think about it in military terms, we want to keep the blast radius as small as possible. Really, that to me is the chief information security officer role, and it's not, it's a team sport. I always talk to people about cybersecurity really being a team sport.
Hmm.
I need to be able to do what I do and do it well, but I need other people to do what they do and do it really well as part of that program. Uh, and the challenge that we've seen, that I think has sort of led us down the path of providing virtual CISO services. And you alluded to this at the top of the call, is that a lot of organizations aren't ready. They aren't big enough. They aren't mature
Hmm.
enough. They don't have the need for that full time role, or they can't afford the full time role, but they still need the services. So if we can determine how we can come in a part time role, so to speak, and help them to better secure their environment
Hmm.
and map out what the needs are. And then again, we're sort of the conductor, if you will. So what pieces do you need? Do you need better, security around your endpoints? Do you need better security at the perimeter? Do you need better security in the web? And then pull in the experts to help us determine, well, what are the pieces we need to put in place to make that happen?
Yeah.
And that's our role. A lot of it's also sort of translation, as this becomes highly technical, and for the average, small to mid-sized customer, those words don't mean anything when we get into those really, really technical terms around encryption and the levels of
Yeah.
encryption. That's tough to swallow. So, my role a lot of the times is talking to the really smart guys about the need for encryption, for example, but then translating that to something the customer can understand.
Yeah. Well, so we're probably have many of our listeners out there that are either small, medium-sized business owners, or maybe they're working in IT. They might be the director of IT, vice president of IT. They may be the CIO. Why why do we need a separate role? Why is that separation important?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons for that, really. One of them is, and we see this with audit a lot of the times, right? So the reason that I would normally bring in an auditor and I wouldn't use the person who built the system, for example, is you won't see some of the gaps, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the times it's really helpful to have that third party or that third set of eyes, the additional eyes that isn't involved in the operational aspect to see the environment through a different lens and to look at it to say, oh, how can we better secure this environment? We do a lot of security risk assessments, and oftentimes that's the first step in any engagement, even in a virtual CISO, because we need to determine where are you now and
Mm-hmm.
figure out, well, how do we improve? And one of the common discussions that I have with people when we engage in that sort of thing is to point out that we're really not looking at things to say you did a bad job. We don't want to point out bad things that have been done. What we want to do is figure out how can we improve? Where do we
Mm-hmm.
see gaps so that we can improve the environment? Because the concern isn't around whether you did a good job or a bad job. The concern is that going to be exploited by a bad
Right.
actor?
Right.
So, we find that additional set of eyes that isn't involved in the day-to-day operational can be really important.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the job's just gotten big, right? So I mean, it's really, really hard. We talk to people all the time who are really, really smart, who are running their IT organization, oftentimes very well for what they need to have happen.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is that's a full-time job times two
Yep.
sometimes.
Yep.
So, they're mired. They may know that they want to secure their environment better. They may have really good ideas about it, but one, they don't have the time to do it. Oftentimes, they don't have the experience. So they know, but they haven't done, and they just can't get to it. So it's on the list, but it continues to stay at the bottom of the list, and it never gets executed on.
Mm-hmm.
One of the points that I make a lot of the time to folks when we're engaging in sort of that virtual CISO role is that we're not going to get pulled down the rabbit hole of the day-to-day operational. You're going to get pulled into I can't print or I
Uh-huh.
can't get this thing to work in my environment. My phone doesn't function the right way. We're not. Our role is laser focused on making sure that you're going to be more secure.
Yeah. But back in the day, and I'd say back in the day, maybe 7, 10 years ago, there was this real struggle between security and efficiency and productivity, right? If I put all this security in there, you're just going to slow me down. You're going to make it impossible for me to do my job. Are you still seeing that out there in business today, Alan?
A little bit, a little bit. So I think one, we've gotten
Yeah,
better
it is, and
about
so
that,
and
right?
I
Because in the security landscape, we've learned, right? We can't stop productivity to be more secure. Now, I can make you secure if I turn everything off and unplug all the wires. Okay, so you're absolutely secure. You're also not doing business. So,
Yeah.
so that's not an answer. So we've learned a little bit about that. Also, the technology's gotten a lot better. So the pieces that we put in play, I call them the components that make up the systems. The endpoint tools that we put in are a lot lighter on an endpoint than what they used to be. The tools that we deploy need to be lighter in their approach, while they need to do heavier and heavier lifting. So that's a challenge for our partners who are out there developing and designing these solutions. Uh, it's on us as advisors to our customers, though, to kind of tread that line to help them understand, that it may slow things down, but we need to make sure that it doesn't slow it down too much,
Mhm.
right? And that's the challenge. The places where we see that the most are the things that are right in front of your face. So, some of the technologies that do that are things like mobile device management. Why? Because it's the device that people touch. So if we deploy that, and I've certainly done that in a lot of environments, and that's where we get into a lot of politics because we're touching a device that somebody uses every day. So if we affect its performance, we've done a bad thing. Uh, we also see that with things like multi-factor authentication. We're adding a step, right?
Yeah.
It's an important step, but we're adding a step. So there's a way for us to design these solutions and deploy these solutions so that they provide better security without drastically hampering the productivity in the environment. And if we don't do that, we're not doing our job as an
Yeah.
advisor to the customer because ultimately we're trying to make sure their productivity stays at the highest level that it can while securing the environment. Security needs to be a partner with the business. And if we're slowing the business down, that's a bad thing.
Yeah. Even to the point of slowing down to read an email, right? You that's I don't know if that is the number one way that we see cyber attacks today, but I know it's up there. Is the phishing scams and
Hmm.
such, and teaching people to stop and think because we get in that rush and
Yeah.
we're just trying to clear the incoming flood. And I got an email over the weekend about from a software supposedly from a software company that I use to manage my business, and it wanted me to update all my tax information.
Mm.
Well, why?
Good.
You got to stop and ask why all of a sudden are they asking me to do that? I mean, I know it's tax time,
Hmm.
but I've already got my 1099,
Hmm.
right? So something
Well, good
triggered
for
my
you.
head.
Good
Uh,
for you to think that way. That's the challenge is some of the and you're dead on, right? Phishing is the perfect weapon right now for the bad guys.
mhm,
One of the common statements that I hear, I want to make sure that I say it right because it's a little bit of a tongue twister, but sometimes you hear that people are the biggest threat to the organization. And I don't really like to say that because the people are actually what makes the organization tick, right? So
yeah, yeah,
kind of my back to my analogy, if I can, unplug everything and turn it off and you'll be safe. Well, if I don't have any employees, you'd be safe too, but you also again wouldn't have a business. So, people I think can be the most vulnerable to the organization, but I don't like to think of people as a threat. But I tell you, in a lot of the consulting that we do, that's one of the missing components uh, is slowing people down and doing training and teaching them. A
mhm,
lot of the reason that phishing, for example, is so successful is that a lot of it is psychological, right? So if I send you just like these guys did,
mhm,
it's tax time, so you want to deal with that. Or if
yeah,
a common threat that we see exploited is using the "Don't you want to help the IT team" message.
yeah,
So, hey, your password needs to be reset. Yeah, if you click here and input your information, then the IT folks won't have to do this. So, most people want to be helpful, so you want
yeah,
to do
yeah.
that. So that's psychological. So going through and training people to think about these things and respond to them appropriately and then putting measurements in place where we reward people for alerting us.
Mhm.
And so there's also this common thought that if I click on something, I don't want to tell anybody, right? Because I might have just caused a problem. Well, we don't want that, so they're afraid. What we want people to say is, I clicked on something, let me tell somebody as fast as possible and reward them for letting us know, and not beat them about the head for not telling us. But it's I see that all the time.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's a big deal. I'm glad you brought it up.
Well, we talked a little bit about what is the role of a CISO or a vCISO. What isn't the role? What's a misconception that's out there about the role?
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point too. And that's another challenge that we have. Again, sort of back to that security concept is security is a big world. So not everybody is right to do all the chores, and they shouldn't
Hmm.
be. So oftentimes when we're engaged to do a virtual CISO type of engagement, people might think, well, you're going to come in and you're going to reconfigure my firewalls, and you're going to configure, the identity and authentication tool sets, and we're not. We typically, in that role, we don't lay hands on to the equipment.
Hmm.
Right, that's the role for security engineers. That's the role for security architects. Uh, what we need to do is to work with the customer to understand how to better secure the environment, and then work with those smart engineers and architects to develop and then deploy the solutions.
Yeah.
So that's a really common, misnomer. Uh, there's so many different roles in security. A common role, and we do a lot of work in this area. A common role is pen testing and
Right.
vulnerability assessments, right? And that's a really important piece of the security puzzle, is to do testing and to see, well, where do we stand, and then but then taking that data, the findings from a test like that, to find out, well, we've got gaps in these places. That report needs to come to somebody like the CISO or the virtual
Hmm.
CISO, because we can use that. That becomes part of the evidence that we use to develop how we're going to harden the environment.
Yeah.
Uh, but it is very common for someone to think, well, the security person does all of these things. And there are some really, really, wizard like security people out there who do all the things, but those people aren't the normal people, right? There's
Yeah.
only so much room in most people's brains, so you really need to focus on the things that you can do and do well.
Yeah.
I'll go back to it's a team sport. I found that I work better in that team sport environment, in helping to do the things that we can do, but I shouldn't be configuring your firewalls. I shouldn't be configuring endpoints. I shouldn't be doing forensics analysis. I need to be able to ingest that information and understand it, but I'm not the one who should do that.
Yeah. I love the way you described it. I listened to you talk several weeks ago, and you described kind of your initial role coming into a new environment as meeting the client where they are. From your perspective, what does it mean to meet a client where they are?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. That's important to me, at least in my personal sort of methodology, is, again, I realize, and I look at this security journey as something that's important, but what more important is the business being able to do business, whether that business is running a school system, or whether it's manufacturing something, or go down the list. Our job in the security space is to help them protect and defend that environment so that they can do what they do.
Mhm.
So we need to meet them, if you will, where they are, and figure out, well, what are the important pieces of your business? What really makes this business tick? And then understand, well, what are the components? What are the servers, the clouds, the network equipment that make these business functions operate? And then how can we defend those?
Mhm.
And that's really, really the critical path. One of the things that I see get missed a lot is that step. And I don't say that to throw anybody under the bus, but
Mhm.
it's really easy just to jump in and say, well, we've got the solution, but we really need to understand the problem first. And a lot of the times it's not just people in our world that do that. A lot of the times customers and people who are running business, they want that immediate gratification. Give me the prescription, so to speak. The challenge is, I can't go to my doctor and get the prescription until they do some analysis. It
Mhm.
doesn't work that way. And when we're charged to do that, oftentimes the right thing is to say, no, 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 we can't. And if that means that, well, this isn't, a good fit for us, then I would
Mhm.
rather do that than to jump in and do a poor job.
Yeah. Well, if I'm a leader at a small or mid-sized business, how can I best help you help me?
Sure. Well, I think part of that is one. I'll pivot that back around. I think it's my job and people who are in my role to educate a little bit first, right? So, uh, again, this security world is big. It's nasty. It can be very technical and confusing. And typically, the person who's trying to run their business, they don't understand this. They shouldn't. understand it, not at the level that I need to. At the same time, I don't know how to run their business, right? So there's a value that they have that I don't have. So I think it's important for me to be able to spend time to educate them and make them aware of the pieces that they need to know while not inundating them with all of the minutia that they don't need to know. And then if I can approach them in that way, then they're going to have a more open mind to say, yeah, I do understand that this is important and that we do need to take the time to possibly slow our users down and have them read emails or spend some time doing training with our users. That's an investment on an
Mhm.
organization's point of view, right? So when those users are doing the training, they're not doing their other job. And so that could be looked at as a hindrance. So I really look at it as is my job or people in my type of role to inform that business leader so that they can make that decision that this is important enough for me that I do want to slow down. I do want to dedicate a little time for that training, or I do want to
Mhm.
dedicate a little time for this tool to slow this machine down a fraction of a percent of the time. Uh, and that's tough, specifically for a lot of people in the security space. They have a technical background. And
Mhm.
so they immediately want to say, you should do this. And they want everybody's head to nod up and down. And if they don't, then that person's stupid.
Mhm.
Right. And it, it really doesn't work like that. If I can't explain it to that business leader in such a way that it does make good business sense for them, that's my fault. It's not the
Mhm.
business leader's fault
Yeah.
altogether.
Well, wouldn't it just be easier if I just went to the cloud? Then I don't have to worry about all this security stuff.
Right. Well, yeah, absolutely. So, partial credit, you get partial credit. Yeah. So the cloud presents interesting pieces all the way around, right? So the cloud's a good thing. It provides a lot of elasticity, a lot of ability to grow, expand, scale. It takes a lot of the lifting off of the infrastructure, at least at the first level. The challenge, though, is exactly what you said, tongue in cheek, is a lot of people don't understand that because I put my stuff in the cloud, it doesn't mean you get to wash your hands of the security responsibility that you have.
Mhm.
And assuming that the cloud vendor is securing your stuff is just bad. You can't make that assumption. A lot of cloud solutions do add some fundamental security best practices. So things like physical security, you get away from concerning yourself nearly as much about that.
Right.
And just to break that down, what do I mean? So if Jeff and Alan have our own little business and we've got some servers that we've got in our office, I've got to make sure that people can't just walk in and pick up those servers and walk away with them.
Right.
Sounds simple, but it happens, right?
Hmm.
I get away from that if I put my servers in the cloud or those functions in the cloud because these cloud providers, they're highly secure from a physical point of view. I can't just walk in there and pick up a server and walk out with it. So those pieces do go away. But some of the other pieces, the fact that I've got to care a lot about identity, who's logging in really becomes super important because that's how I get access. I need to care about how that data gets backed up and how I can restore it, which oftentimes in the cloud does not happen natively. A lot of the time, data just gets replicated in the cloud, which is good for a high availability solution.
Hmm.
But if I've got something bad in my primary location, it just means that that bad gets replicated to the secondary location that much faster.
Hmm.
Backups still matter. So moving things to the cloud, I think, is a great solution. It needs to be just like any other solution. It needs to be well thought out, well designed, well deployed, and then well managed. But it does not alleviate this. It doesn't take the responsibility away for security. It changes that, and there's shared responsibility models that
Right.
say if you put your stuff in the cloud, you don't have to care about this piece, but you still have to care about this piece. And there's
Mhm.
layers of that that are really important.
And navigating that's got to be a challenge. Well, so I'm an IT person. I believe that we need to have secured environments, but I just can't convince my business ownership to invest the dollars. Can you help me?
That's part of the job, right? It really is, and that's a very common issue. a lot of the times technologists understand that, hey, there's a gap here. Translating that into why this matters, why you should invest is a big part of the puzzle. I like to lean against factors there like risk assessment methodologies for us to really look at the importance of the important concepts to the business. So if I sat down with you, Jeff, and one of my first questions in any sort of risk assessment methodology would be, what's important to you? And if you tell me, well, accounting, if I couldn't write checks to my employees, that would be a big deal.
Mhm.
Okay, well, let's think about that and let's figure out, well, where are the systems that allow you to write those checks? Well, if that's on server A and I've got four PCs that connect to server A through these switches and this firewall, then I need to look at those and determine, how secure are they? After we assess those types of things, then we find any gaps. So maybe we find out that there's some misconfigurations there. Then it's our job to look at that through a risk sort of point of view. And what I mean there is, what's the likelihood that whatever the gap is that we found would be exploited? And then what would the impact to the organization be if it were? And that'll give us a risk score. So then we can look at all the findings through a risk assessment process and score those. Then we can sit down with the business and have a discussion not about technology tools, but we have discussions around the risks to the environment. You have a risk to your environment, and this is what it is. This is how likely it is. This is the impact it would have to your business, and this is how much it would affect you, either through downtime,
Mhm.
loss of ability to continue to manufacture widgets or what have you, and then they can make an educated decision on whether they want to invest in closing those gaps or not.
Yeah. Becomes their what's their appetite for risk, right?
Absolutely.
You've defined what the risk is. Now, what's my appetite as a business leader to accept that risk?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and really, to kind of go back to a question you asked earlier, to me, that's the job of the CISO,
Hmm.
or the virtual CISO. It really is about risk management, and so all the things behind the scenes that are interesting, all the technology tools, all the security tools that we deploy make that happen. But what we're really trying to do is reduce risk to the organization.
Yeah.
But in any sort of business, if I'm the business leader, if I'm the CIO, the COO, even up to the CFO and the CEO, I care about where I invest time and money. And
Hmm.
so I, as a security practitioner or security leader, need to be able to point out why you should invest and make a good case for that. And if
Yeah.
I can't do that, then I'm not doing a good job.
Well, we have come up on time. I knew it would fly by. Once you and I started talking, I've really enjoyed this. We want to leave our listeners with a really strong call to action, and I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, Alan. I'm going to ask you for a call to action for two types of listener. What's a call to action for the business leader at a small or mid-sized organization? And what's the call to action for our listeners that are CIOs, CTOs, the IT professionals? So, two call to actions, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think I'll start with the technical, the CIO, the CTO folks. I think for those folks, the call is to realize that exactly what we just said is that the business leader may not understand all of the technology that we're discussing. So there, I think it puts you in the role of either taking on that risk planning or partnering and finding people to help you to
Mhm.
do that. You need in that role, in my opinion, to be able to tell the business about the risks that they need to deal with, and the common things that we're seeing out there. So being able to tell those stories matter. So telling the stories of this happened at the pipeline, this happened with the people who manufacture the chicken that I want to pick up tonight. So
Right.
telling those stories is important. And I think that's the path forward for those folks. I think for the business leaders, I think for those people, it's to maybe, and this is harder for me because I feel like I'm preaching a little bit to the choir when I say this, but is to have that open mind and to
Mhm.
realize that I can't continue to do business the same way I've been doing it. I've called this a couple of times in some presentations I've had, the head in the sand practice.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work, and the comment about it's not going to happen to me. I don't have anything that interesting. We're too small. None of those matter, because if you've got an IP address or you're connected to the internet, you can be impacted. So I think really taking a little different view and realizing that as a leader of the organization, I'm responsible for making sure that we're safe and secure. And let me give this a little more time than I had been giving it.
Yeah. I love that advice for both parties in this equation, and it's it's so important, and it's more important each and every day as we look at these threats and look at doing business. Alan, I want to thank you for carving out time to chat with us today. I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed the conversation. Several insights that our listeners are going to get from this, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
No, I appreciate you giving me the time, Jeff. This is an important concept, is an important story to tell. I do a lot of talks with customers, a lot of talks for webinars and whatnot, and just the more we can get the message out, and then if we can help people, or if there are others, it's really important that we just get business and schools and all these environments secure, uh, because if we don't, bad things can happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you again. And to our listeners, if you have a question or want to learn more, visit intervision.com. The show notes will provide links and contact information. This is Jeff Tunn for Alan Jenkins. Thank you very much for listening.
You've been listening to the Status Go podcast. You can subscribe on iTunes or get more information at intervision.com. If you'd like to contribute to the conversation, find InterVision on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Thank you for listening. Until next time.